Don't actually have much familiarity with his earlier work. I definitely make sure to ask because this is definitely one of my favorite debates to have with absolutely anybody. The whole Graduation album, for example, is a reminder of positivity, encouragement, resilience, risk taking, and it's all mixed with testaments to the influence of God. It was bold and it was confident, and not a lot of that is how we describe Ye's legacy at this point in time. I think that is a shame. I just think it's really important to remember that the same guy who did bring us Black Skinhead also brought us Jesus Walks, which to me, like, he's a pioneer in exploring the polarities through art. So I think it's really important to remember that the art and the artists are different beings and can encompass and explore different perspectives through that art. Even if the artist, or the listener for that matter, doesn't necessarily resonate with that perspective. It doesn't mean an artist isn't talented because you don't agree with everything that they say, or you're basing their art based on opinions formed about the narratives of the artist. I will also say that I think Can't Tell Me Nothing is an overall important component to Ye's story, the trajectory of his post-graduation career, and the series of events, antics, and narratives that have formed the more commonly perceived persona of him that we are now more familiar with today. And when I listen to the chorus of Can't Tell Me Nothing now, la, 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 wait till I get my money right. La, 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 then you can't tell me nothing, right? Excuse me, is you saying something? Nuh-uh, you can't tell me nothing. It sounds a lot like a pinnacle moment that ended up getting him thrown under a glass ceiling, which is really interesting to look at in hindsight. Also from Can't Tell Me Nothing, he says, "To whom much is given, much is tested. Get arrested, guess until he gets the message." Now this line, Candace Owens, also a big Ye fan, talks a lot about this exact thing and is a current example of this type of thing happening to people, as demonstrated in her ongoing and escalating ordeal with Who Even Knows and in her quest for justice and truth. From my personal experience through my situation, different players maybe, but can't say for certain, where heartfelt expression and a quest for truth results in a staged life by soul-snatching handlers and the 8 attempts to institutionalize me for a non-existent mental health issue since September 12th. No one showed this much concern during my Dark Night of the Soul days, which lasted like a really long time, and I've significantly improved from since then, because I do a lot of work on myself and try to heal through my trauma. Attempts to bankrupt and evict me currently in progress while actively wrecking all of my stuff that I do have. She's delusional, says all the people that have had to go out of their way to commit crimes to try to frame me for crimes. Caught doing it like immediately every time. Shout out to the ancestors. Which is funny because there used to be this story about my dad and how he was such a good goalie. Like they actually put his jersey on someone else during a scout camp one year. Just a side note though. A line from the song Barry Bonds seems pretty poignant these days. They say he's going crazy and we've seen this before, but I'm doing pretty good as far as geniuses go. It just seems to be all about trying to break the spirit, which makes trying to maintain hope and confidence in knowing who you are and what you stand for that much harder, but also reiterates why it's important to maintain that hope and operating in love and that compassion for other people and just looking towards God for guidance, because it's not always fair on an earthly level, especially when, for people like me, you become aware that it's not your own hands on the controller for your character. And I think a lot of the research she's doing is freeing some minds, and that's a really beautiful thing. Because I thought it was only at a couple schools. Not anything with a supply that has the ability to categorize people based on how they diagnose their trauma, and banking on a particular set of trauma responses. Just another tinfoil hairkerchief theory, but also an opinion formed from personal experience. The depth of perspective has been particularly helpful in my situation. Might explain a little bit about what's happening to us college dropouts, you know? Because it all only sounds like tinfoil hairkerchief shit until you discover you've been repeatedly dosed, unknowingly corralled for narrative purposes while being told things are good ideas or it's just your perception, while you're made out to be the crazy one, but also while being set up to fail and left questioning your entire reality. That's how you know you were signed up for something that you weren't aware of. And then it makes you wonder, why all the effort? From my experience, too, it usually turns out to be the same people that are the first to call you crazy or twist the narrative that are throwing the rocks, hiding the hands, and distorting the reality. The brighter the shine, or a certain timbre of voice, the heavier the pile on. And Lord be with you if you're holding on to some truth. Everything I'm not makes me everything I am applies here too. Because there's usually some light and unique aspect within that's what they're trying to snuff out. I've also found it helpful to not always look at how many people are saying something, because a lot of manipulators will default to that. Look how many people are saying it. So it's important to look at who's saying what. Are there hidden agendas or motives? Who stands to gain or benefit from what? Sometimes it's not that deep. But for people like Ye or Candace and myself, I think it's simply about silence. So most things will get misconstrued, misinterpreted, or demonized regardless. I guess we talk with so much emphasis. Ooh, they so sensitive. Like in Can't Tell Me Nothing. Seems appropriate here. Especially since my intentions and inflections combined with passionate speaking and hand talking seem to just baffle and confuse a lot of people regularly. Side note on the Candace thing though, she is an absolute badass, and even though she's younger than me, I aspire to be more like her when I grow up. Not in a competitive way, but in a, ooh, think about the tag team of truth that could be kind of way. So I'm super concerned about what she's going through, and I'm wishing nothing but love, light, and protection for her and her family, and may no weapon formed prosper against her sword of truth. Girl, trust me when I say there are a few people that need you to survive more than I do. The ones who question when things don't sound right and are confident enough to say no to things that they aren't comfortable with. So they're normally forced. Like her with her lawsuits, and me in my situation. It's a matter of trying to tie me up financially so I can't fight it from any side. And trying to cause so much stress to me that I don't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with any of it. Any support I had is pretty much gone, and any support that I could gain is preemptively blocked for the most part. It's a lot, and it does take a mental toll. And I'm tired of having to rewrite scripts multiple times because parts of them keep ending up in other places before I can release an episode. All of a sudden having all sorts of computer issues, being real slow. I do kind of struggle with it because it is a lot, but that's why it's so important to speak up about it when you're able to. Targeted individuals is a fairly new term, but as it turns out, there are more of us than what's often portrayed. I'm sure everybody's just called crazy or given a label that would make no one have any empathy for their situation, though. I've been fighting against gang stalking for 3 years, and most people I know have supposedly never heard that term before. It's not a good feeling. There are days it does feel really crazy, and I spend a lot of time wondering what I did to deserve it, because most of the time it's people that I had love and respect and cared for. In times when I get down about it, I like to throw on the song Champion and remind myself that, like Ye, when it feels like living's harder than dying, for me, giving up's way harder than trying. While most people think I do things to be controversial, I actually don't. Like I've been saying the whole time, my goal has been peace, love, and never giving up. And also I seemed to be one of the first people to flag a situation that ended up becoming much bigger than anybody anticipated it being. And to me, the whole concept of me trying to be controversial is ironic because I generally try to stay as balanced as I can when making considerations. And I know I can get a little spicy, so that's why I try to take my emotions out of my considerations. I also seem to have this thing where I get physically ill if I try to lie. And there's power in truth. That's why extreme and extensive lengths are usually taken to silence it. Honesty shouldn't be hurtful, but to those unwilling to acknowledge shortcomings or mistakes, will often find it to be anyways and will paint you out to be the villain. If you operate in love and integrity and good intentions and empathy, then that should be what matters because you have to live with you and your conscience. I always try to tell people that just because I don't say anything doesn't mean I don't clock it. That's usually my way of trying to keep the peace. Usually, what I'll do instead is kind of let someone know that, like, I know what you're doing, please stop, it's not true or right or whatever. But if I say something, there's generally a reason why I'm saying something. And since I've been called crazy and had all my concerns invalidated my whole life, you best believe that I won't say shit until I have at least 3 examples to support why I think the way that I do. Which, if we're being honest, is the real reason most people talk shit and try to ruin my life rather than debate me on anything. Then they'll say I'm volatile while actively trying to hurt me every day with increasing intensity. Coming past on the speed, I made it to a jam. Now everything I'm not made me everything I am. Being authentic and standing in your truth isn't easy and will always be a challenge to hold on to your integrity. And there are a lot of things that will make you question yourself. It's a series of choices. Values can act as your guiding light through tough times, though. For the most part, I don't fit in anywhere and I'm misunderstood. I always have been. At this point, I'm convinced that I always will be. It's usually how I end up as the scapegoat in most situations as well. Does it suck? Absolutely. But, like Ye says, everything I'm not makes me everything I am. I'll never be laid back as the speed was. It's a glass half full or half empty kind of situation. You choose where you attune your energy. What I personally feel is the benefit to being authentic, telling the truth, and focusing on yourself and your personal growth, healing and working through your trauma in a healthy, productive way. It makes it much easier to see the real intentions and what really reflects you and what's being projected on you by other people. For example, in my situation, every attack is some sort of projection, and in my personal opinion, more reflective of those doing it to me than me. So even if they call me crazy, everyone's true colors end up showing eventually. And why? Because as I've said this whole time, everything has been based on a fictionalized version of me created to suit a narrative. I was not the author of that narrative, but I've been trying to have faith that one day God will prove my innocence. As annoying as the constant and meticulously contrived assassination of my character has been, and as stressful as knowing being unalived or thrown in jail for crimes I didn't commit are likely to be the only reprieve from that, can't forget psych ward because that seems to be the preferred option. And they're about to take the only place where I have any semblance of safety, even though they've been intentionally trying to make it as uncomfortable as possible. The reality has been I've turned out to be more right than I even knew at the time in a lot of situations. And you know what gave it away? Everything that happened was based on how everyone else would react if they were in my situation. If they were really telling the truth, knew what they were talking about, or had actually believed I had been truthful in anything I'd been saying. Better yet, if anyone had had a conversation with me with the intent to understand rather than to just entrap, it would be pretty easy to figure out why I'm not reacting the way that's been anticipated. The rumor mill can get pretty out of control, especially if you're not trying to defend yourself that much and no one defends you in rooms you aren't in or at times where you can't speak up for yourself. It's like that game of telephone where the story is usually so far off base by the time it gets to the 100th person. The issue in both cases is essentially the same. There's no opportunity for clarity along the way from the person with the original story as it makes its way down the line. Does it bother me that I have to go through it all? Yeah, but it breaks my heart in a whole other way. It makes me sad for the people doing it because it shows where they're unhealed, what would hurt or break them, so they do it to me. But I'm not them because, like the song says, everything I'm not makes me everything I am. The reactions to the non reaction are also a pretty good indicator as well, in my experience. In a lot of cases, they're the only moments of truth I've gotten in 3 years. People being authentic, confident, and standing in their truth tends to only bother people with ill intentions. If you truly care about someone and they're doing as good as they can, trying to make the best out of a bad situation and keeping hope and a positive attitude, then you shouldn't be upset that attempts to tear them down aren't working, and you wouldn't be attempting to tear them down, in my opinion. In any relationship. But I'm also the friend that says don't ask if you don't want the honest answer either, because I think it's just feedback to help people be the best versions of themselves. Whether they want to take it or not is up to them, and I could probably work on my delivery a little bit. However, I can acknowledge it might be a possible reason for my lack of quality friends. Interpret that how you want it. Giving examples of the same issue in multiple instances isn't rehashing, but using a bad instance of old traits or scenarios that were from a much less healed space is, especially after many years of consistently showing improvement in a positive direction. But a quick note from DMX seems appropriate here. Life or death, live or die, I will never live a lie. There are too many people that try to use me as a means to make them feel better about themselves without looking at themselves. They want to know how I made so much progress. I was honest how they could make the same kind of progress. And a lot of that was I had to be honest with myself before I could do any sort of healing. I had to acknowledge the places where I hurt or where I had low self-worth or where I was ashamed or where I had regrets. And if you're unwilling to do that, then you can't achieve that same level of progress. Also, for reference, when it comes to talking honestly or giving feedback, I will absolutely tell you why I think the way I do. I'm not trying to be mean, I'm trying to be honest. But, as is the theme of this episode, everything I'm not makes me everything I am. And I've become comfortable with that for myself. And honestly, it probably wouldn't have gotten to that point if it weren't for Ye. I really have to thank him for the inspiration, motivation, and just great tunes over the course of his career. And I hope it gives them some comfort and pride to know trying to protect the West are a light-skinned girl and a Candace Owens. God calling on the hotline for that remix. When you're a star, how could you not shine? I hope that in some way my videos have had a positive impact, which is authentically who I am. So I think it's really cool that the Graduation album starts with a song called Good Morning, which I started this episode with. So I want to close with a line from his closing track, which is technically a bonus track called Good Night. And it's not a line coming from Ye. I believe it's I'll Be Back that has it. I'd like to close out with these words. If I part, my art will live through you. Dream beautiful and unusual. For me personally, I hope that even if my art may be forgettable, that hopefully at least my words might have had some sort of positive impact. And if something happens to me, it might be because I'm exploring my new tinfoil hairkerchief theory of whether or not my dad really died in 2002, or just as I knew it, and might have worn a few masks until 2019. I don't know, guess we'll see. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Okay, so pretty happy with how that turned out. So the song itself wasn't really hard to play, but I was struggling with the tab a little bit. But once I did a couple run throughs of the song and got the progression down a little bit, it was much easier to follow along with. And then it was just a matter of trying to get it on time with where the beats land in the song. This is a good one, nice and mellow, and it's a nice, relaxing, reflective song. So I would highly recommend giving it a try. Again, it's a really easy one to learn.
I do find sometimes with rap songs, it's a little harder to keep up on the verses just because they talk a lot quicker, but it's good for trying to increase speed with movement of hands, I find. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, keep the peace and keep rocking on.